Welcome to our European Payments webinar where we focus on the Omni-Channel future. Okay, so I'm Chris Welsh. I am Vice President of TV and Entertainment across EMEA, focusing on the TV and video space for both sports clients and television companies. And my colleague Jay Payne.
Hi, I'm Jay Payne. I've worked in payments for 20 years, working right across the ecosystem from merchants all the way through acquirers and issuer processors.
Okay, thank you, Jay. All right, so just before we get started into the webinar today, we just want to establish some house rules. So if you'd like to ask a question, you should be able to see the raise hand icon on the dashboard where you can ask anything you like. We will answer these questions, but from experience, we'll leave the questions and answers until the end just to keep the fluidity of the presentation today. Okay, so what's in store? First of all, we're going to look at coverage and painting the picture. We'll have a look at acquiring and regional and international acquiring. What are the best practices for the right situations? Compliance, so privacy and payment compliance and the key considerations that fall in line with that. Localization, so how to think locally to grow globally. User journeys as well, what's important at the checkout pages in terms of registration, payment flows and so on to make sure that that's a seamless and frictionless experience for the end user. And also we like to finish up with optimum solutions. So from our experience in the industry, what we believe to be the best solutions to work across the European market. Okay, so first of all, Jay will discuss coverage and painting the picture.
Great, thanks, Chris. So if we look across Europe, I think it's fair to say that it's not a level playing field, and certainly our adoption of payments and the choice of payment solutions varies from country to country. So if we look at the first country, which is the UK and Ireland, we are pretty much dominant in our usage of cards, which would actually take us above 80% usage of online payments, with direct debit and PayPal certainly in subscription models where you would see direct debit being quite popular. And there's some reasons why the UK nation prefers cards. I think we still trust the card brands. They are accessible to us. And we haven't suffered major fraud issues that we might have seen in other countries. However, we do like direct debit because it's an association back with our bank, and we like the frictionless payment journey that PayPal provides. But in the UK, if you were to transact online, selling digital goods or services, you've got cards, direct debit, and PayPal will see you obtain the maximum amount of users going through a successful payment journey and buying digital goods or services. If we compare that to other countries in Europe, the UK differs quite dramatically. So if we look at Germany, we see PayPal, GiroPay, ELV and so forth start to appear, with GiroPay and ELV being very, very popular in the German market, and less so on cards, with cards being responsible for over 40% of all successful payments for online purchases. We do see the emergence of SEPA, and we expect to see the rising SEPA and its profile more in 2016 due to some of the legislative rules which are going to come into force, forcing all bank transfers to conform to the SEPA mandate. And if we can compare that to France, very, very similar to the UK, with direct debit and PayPal being dominant, but the emergence of so forth there. One thing to remember in France, obviously, is that they do have quite a large domestic card scheme with Carte Bleue, and again, they are responsible for a substantial amount of online payments through card. And we have the Netherlands, And this is where we start to see some of the regional branding like Ideal and Klarna. And what's quite interesting around these alternative payment methods, or APMs, as they may be referred to in literature you might find coming through the payments industry, is they are all now based on SEPA at the back end. So we might see Ideal and Klarna as the consumer facing brand, but underneath, in effect, what you've got is a SEPA transaction taking place. And again, we see Klarna re-emerge back in Sweden, where it again is a major and mainstream payment method for online purchases. So across Europe, you can see that not only do you need to offer out card payments and SEPA or direct debit, but within each country, you may need to think about offering out those domestic schemes which the consumers are more au fait with.
Okay, thank you, Jay. Right, so next we're going to look at acquirers, regional and international. Okay, so there's been some changes within the schemes and legislation coming through from Europe in terms of interchange fees which are applicable to card transactions, with the flattening down of credit card at 0.2% and debit card at 2 pence. Now, that does not necessarily mean that we're going to see I suppose a common acceptance rate of transactions in terms of approval in each of the countries within Europe, and we will still see there a need to have domestic acquiring in place to drive the highest levels of conversion. We also need to think about PCI compliance when we're taking card payments, and PCI is applicable to all countries, so there are no countries which are out of scope of PCI within the European Union. Then we start to look at personal identifiable information and data protection, and the two countries which are probably more stringent in terms of their rule set are Germany, and I'm going to include Russia in discussion. And what that may need you to think about is what information you do capture around your customer or your consumer. If it's not really required in terms of obtaining the customer's payment, then you should challenge yourself on whether or not you want to capture that information in case it does bring you into scope of some of the regional rules. Some examples there are, do you really need to capture the sex of your customer or consumer? If not, then don't, because that may actually bring you into consideration from some of the regional rules in Germany. Data protection. The main changes that we've seen there recently around Safe Harbor, and the European Union and the US now have changed their rule sets in terms of the protection that's levied, and again, that it may be important in terms of where your data processing takes place, especially if you are using cloud services. In terms of fraud management, I think we're starting to see the re-emergence of fraud, and it's moving more away from just looking at the card, which was always the central data element within many fraud solutions. We're now looking at many more data points. So we've got the ability to do device fingerprinting, we've got GeoIP lookup, we've got the card, and we can also capture much more information around the customer's details. In particular, the ability to use methods and mechanisms to see whether or not an email address used to register for a service is actually a brand new entity which is not seen before, and may only have been alive for the last 7 days, and that may make you think about whether or not you accept that transaction from that customer, which could potentially be fraudulent. So again, and fraud management, certainly within online services, we're starting to see us think about a lot more data elements, which means that we can be much smarter about accepting payments or declining payments to protect our fraud risk. Okay, thank you, Jay. All right, the next section is localization. So I think this is a really important section, and I know it's a bit of a cliche, but you do need to think locally to grow globally. And there's a number of different considerations we need to be aware of in this respect in terms of the localization or internationalization offer that you provide. So Jay already touched on alternative payment types, which is incredibly important if you want to work across multiple European markets. But there are other areas too. Of course, Europe is a fragmented market with lots of different languages and lots of different currencies. So the ability to support local currencies, local languages, and of course the local alternative payment types becomes very, very important in this area. And I have a couple of reference cases that I'll quickly describe. So as I touched on at the start, I head up TV and sport across EMEA, and I've worked with a number of sporting groups recently that have international fan bases. So localization becomes a very important consideration for those businesses. So one sports brand I've been working with outside of the UK and the US, the highest traffic, the highest unique visitors they have across their website is in Turkey, but they've never really been able to convert the consumers in the Turkish region to paid services such as their league passes. And that's because they're hosting the pages in English language and US variations of that. They're not supporting alternative payment types that are popular in the Turkish region, and of course they're not supporting Turkish currency either. So if you don't really provide these local these local components, then you will struggle to convert local consumers to paid services. Another example would be a sports client that has a very well-established OTT service on a global scale, and they are a very popular football club that have millions of fans all around the world, including that in Asia. A lot of football clubs are experiencing, a lot of traffic from the Asian region, but they're using just standard PSPs that can't process in local currency, that can't offer local payment types either. And again, unsurprisingly, they're experiencing a lot of difficulties trying to convert their Asian fans to paid and registered services for the US and UK markets. So I touched on reducing barriers for the consumer with the localization element, and again with your user journeys and your frictionless flows, this is an important consideration. So it's very imperative that operators produce seamless journeys from finding a product or a service that you'd like to purchase through to registering for that service and of course paying for that service. So we believe it's very important to have a responsive website. So the younger demographics nowadays are accessing digital content across many different screens. For example, our implementation with Sky's Now TV is across 60 different screens. So that includes all of the popular games consoles, the connected TVs, web, mobile, tablet, and others. So it's incredibly important that the payment skins, the registration skins, and any customer-facing pages really are responsive to those different channels, to those different devices. Other considerations too around domains. So what we like to do here at MPP Global is host our registration and payment pages on a subdomain of the client. So client X / payments or payments / client X. And then that enables that ensures that the customer believes that they haven't left the environment of the company where they're purchasing services. So they're going to land on their, the website of choice. They're going to browse an interface, select a product or a service, and then they're going to move through that registration and payment flow. And if they believe that is one single journey with the website that they know and trust, the likelihood for conversions is much greater. So that's another important consideration. We'd always recommend using subdomains and similar. And Jay did touch on this regarding German privacy laws and so on with, collecting the sex of the consumer. But, we work across publishing, sports and TV and retail actually, but we specialize in media. And in the media industry, we see two different things really across TV and publishing. In publishing, because sometimes they're selling print subscriptions and so on, it's very important to collect addresses and information like that. However, in TV, where it's digital services that can be accessed wherever and there's no physical fulfillment of goods, it's not necessary to collect addresses at this point. So you may want to adopt a dual strategy, really, where you collect the minimum amount of fields of data that you need at the first point of contact, such as create a username and an ID, an email address and a password, essentially, and then collect some payment details. Then in the future, you could use surveys or additional areas where you could collect more data to try and create a richer profile against that user in line with the services and products that they're purchasing and consuming as well. So another important consideration to try and reduce barriers for the consumer to paid services. Okay, so future gazing, I'm going to pass you back to my colleague Jay.
So if we look at the main driver, which is I think at the heart of a lot of strategies these days, it's about omni-channel. And one of the difficulties we have is if a consumer has been acquired through a payment method or acquisition point, how do you collate or correlate those users back together so you know that if Chris has purchased a product in a store, that it's the same Chris that has purchased a product on your online site. And that's the same through acquisition points as well. And one of the major challenges has been around how you represent a card, and we are seeing the emergence of tokenization services from the schemes. And this is something that MPP Global has been working on as well with a major retailer, which will allow the major retailer to actually join together the payments that are presented online to those that have been presented in the store through a point of sale. Now, point of sale, is that the only method? I think what we're going to start seeing again is the emergence of things like BLEs, Bluetooth low emission beacons, which allows an entity, be that a single shop or a large multinational, to interact with a consumer through Bluetooth and their smartphone. So we started to see that in the UK, and we'll start to see more of that emerge across the European Union. Interestingly, the guys in Sweden have pretty much been the lead in terms of QR codes. So we're seeing the emergence of a company called Payer, and the whole proposition there was around representing a product purchase through the single scan of a QR code. And again, it was all about removing that friction of payment. And one of our clients, Irish Times, is doing this already within Dublin Airport. So through departures, you can scan the QR code and you could subscribe to the Irish Times just through that single scan, very, very frictionless. We'll also start to see the new kids on the block as well. So I think it's fair to say that the major card brands have started to take on PayPal in the stored wallet area of card payments, and with V.me and Masterpass, we will start to see them challenge PayPal within, well, not just globally, but certainly within the European Union, and they're targeting heavily within the UK in particular. And they're going to butt up against the domestic card or payment processor behind backs, and that is Vocalink, who are launching their Zap product. And again, that is, in essence, a stored wallet. Now, will they be successful against PayPal? I think marketing budgets will dictate. They are competing against the new brands, which we're all very, very comfortable with as consumers, like Apple, Google, and Amazon. And again, I think it's fair to say that Apple Pay, with their marketing power, have done phenomenally well in being able to gain any traction at all in launching a new payment method. The one that sits out on the edge, which I'm not sure will gain much more traction in the next couple of years, is Bitcoin. It's still got that association with the dark web, and those users who opt to pay with Bitcoin typically want to remain anonymous. So it's going to be very, very difficult, I think, for Bitcoin to continue to gain good traction in a wider market with consumers, just because of the trust. So I think if we look at the future, We're going to see some of the familiar brands in payments offer new services. We're going to see some of the consumer brands, certainly in technology, appear and offer payment methods if they haven't already done so. And as a consumer, we're going to have lots of choice. Now, the success will, as I say, be based on marketing budgets, but also whether or not the merchant, the payments ecosystem, and the consumer all have a desire and want to actually support these payment methods to get traction. If not, they will likely be doomed to failure, and we'll continue to see payments dominated by cards, PayPal, and those domestic schemes that we all know and trust.
Okay, so moving on to Optum Solutions and what we believe to be a one-stop shop. So 100% coverage across Europe is obviously everyone's goal. To do that, you need to support the alternative payment types, the new kids on the block, and everyone that Jay's just described. You need to drive engagement through, more, I guess, marketing-related activities and making sure that you can support localized services and so on for the right consumer. Having a single view of the customer and all of the activity. And when you have data, obviously you can make better business decisions based on real intelligence. And it's very important that companies and operators start to do that, start to understand the big data that they collect against their consumers and start to utilize, some fantastic companies out there that can help them do that. The seamless customer life cycle, so tokenized payments, one-click transactions, upsell, cross-sell, owning that journey, really understanding the subscriber can really help make sure that your customers remain a customer for as long as possible, and supporting pan-European payments is obviously very important for operators that do work in the Omni-Channel. So if we look at a standard sort of a video ecosystem in terms of payments, of course, I'm not discussing the video workflows, the OVPs, the CDNs, DRM, and so on. But if we look at a typical OTT provider, they will select a vendor that can, support identity management, so creating accounts for those users in the CRM platform, providing full billing lifecycle through subscription management and so on. They'll do payment pages, advanced skins and frictionless payments. They'll utilize marketing and promotions to engage with users, to incentivize them for new custom, to reward and retain them for existing custom, and of course to win back anybody they may have lost. Content management is very important in this area, of course, as well. And you can also leverage things such as metering and paywalls and so on to really start understanding traffic better, whether that's registered traffic or anonymous traffic. For example, we have a meter here at MPP Global that we can put across any website or application, where we start to interrogate pretty heavily the data of the unique visitors coming across the site to understand, what geolocation have they came from, what browser are they using, what devices are they using, what content are they interested in, which links they're clicking, what videos they're accessing, and of course what payment types they choose to utilize to pay for content. If you look at PSP and schemers and acquirers, if you look at first generation OTT services, what we found was it tended to be an operator with some in-house functionality plus some basic PSPs and acquiring. So that's well and good, and that was, it was functional and it worked. But if you want to compete with the big disruptors like Netflix and Amazon Prime and Now TV and others, you're not going to be able to compete with them with the legacy technology. You're not going to be able to compete with them with old APIs. You have to move into the next generation, and that's what we're seeing in the OTT video space, is that providers are starting to look for specialist vendors that can provide many different areas of this ecosystem. So it's less relationships to manage, it's more specialized functionality, it's more media-centric functionality than just PSPs. MPP, of course, are a PSP, but we do have many more strings to our bow, which leads me on nicely to the next slide, where we do look at MPP Global in a little bit more detail. Okay, so the pieces of the jigsaw are complete. And if you look at the MPP Global platform, which is called eSuite, it's comprised of 5 main modules, which is metering and entitlements, identity and CRM, e-commerce and billing, marketing and promotions, and analytics and reporting. So we focus quite heavily on payments today. So I'll introduce e-commerce and billing in a little bit more detail. So about 10 years ago or less now, I think, when Apple first released their iPhone, they instantly became one of the biggest retailers on the planet overnight by, well, a couple of mechanics really. If you purchase an iPhone, on factory settings on page 1, you'll be asked to create an identity, an Apple ID, a username and a password. On the second page in factory settings, you'll be asked to link a payment card or payment account to that centralized identity. And then consumers can move freely into iTunes and purchase content from any content and service provider, whether that be home shopping, gaming, VOD, music, whatever. So that there becomes a very, very powerful proposition. And that's exactly how we work at MPP Global. Because we're PCI Level 1 compliant, it enables us to transmit, process, but crucially store payment data. And by storing payment data, then you can offer tokenized ongoing recurring payments and of course one-click transactions that are very prevalent in iTunes. Other areas such as identity management and CRM, it's really important to understand your consumer. So to collect the information that you require and to start to create rich user profiles against those consumers in the CRM platform. And most of the successful operators nowadays are, of course, using cloud-based CRM, which is what we offer here at MPP Global. Marketing promotions, which I touched on earlier, does really help in terms of engagement and conversion. It's being able to create voucher codes and offers to incentivize consumers to convert to paid services. It's about retaining customers once they've signed up for you through loyalty programs, through service credits and similar mechanics. And of course, it's about winning back any churn subscribers through clever marketing and advanced offers. So that leads me on to analytics and reporting and metering and entitlements. So in the publishing industry, what we see is very fashionable now is metered access paywalls, where consumers can access, say, 10 articles for free on any given month. And if they go to access the 11th article, they're asked to complete an action. That action might be share the content. It might be complete a survey where you can collect that additional information you didn't get on the first user flow. It might be to register or provide further information, or of course it might be to pay for goods. So that's what we see in the publishing industry. But if we take that into video or other areas, the meter can be used in a number of ways. As I touched on, we collect huge amounts of anonymous data against consumers. And that enables us to do a couple of things really. It enables our clients to engage with them with much more intelligence because they understand what content they're interested in and can offer packs that reflect those content tastes. And equally, it also helps increase their advertising revenues. Advertisers want demographic information, and if operators can provide them with, digital profiles against the anonymous users as well as their subscribers or their paid users, then that becomes quite a powerful proposition. And then with analytics and reporting, well, everybody knows how important this is. You have to understand your data. You have to understand your data to make business decisions based on real-time intelligence. So graphical user interfaces with snapshots of churn, revenue, subscription become important, and being able to leverage a reporting suite to understand the consumers, understand daily feeds and habits and trends and so on becomes quite important too. So MPP Global, we would call ourselves a specialist in media. We've worked in that industry for 15 years, and we believe that a combination of these 5 different modules does lean towards an optimum solution. Okay, so I will just see whether I'll just pick out a couple of questions. We only have, well, we're already a little bit over time, so I'll just pick the first one I see. Okay, so you mentioned micropayments in the poll question, but what do you believe is the best environment to leverage micropayments? Okay, so micropayments is usually targeted at low value priced goods, so goods under £2 or maybe €3. And actually, I could go back to the iTunes example we discussed earlier. in iTunes, if you purchased Angry Birds for 69 cents today, you won't receive your invoice immediately. What they'll actually do is hold that, and they'll hope that the consumer will purchase more products and goods over the next 48 hours, or they might enforce a pricing threshold. So they aggregate the payment and send a single invoice to the end user. What that means for Apple is that they pay only one transaction fee on the total value of the aggregated orders, rather than paying a transaction fee against each individual one. So I think the answer to your question is that marketplaces are a good environment to do this, whether it's on the set-top box or smart TV interface where you have hundreds of different content and service providers, or of course like the iTunes example that I've just described. All right, so moving on to the last slide, I believe. Okay, so we'd like to thank you all for attending, and we hope that you did gain something of value today from today's session. In terms of a follow-up, we will send across a copy of the poll results and a white paper, and we'll also provide you with a recording of this webinar. It's also, if you'd like to stay in touch with MPP Global, you can contact us across all of the standard social media channels. Apologies, my screen is frozen. There we go. So we're on Twitter at MPP Global. We're on LinkedIn at MPP Global. Visit us on the web at www.mppglobal.com, and you can see our contact details here as well. So webinars is something that we do quite regularly, and we do it in many different areas. Payments today, of course, on the Omni-Channel, European, but we do look at other areas such as CRM and identity and marketing engagement and other things that you may find interesting. So we'd encourage you to stay in touch with us, contact us, and if anybody would like to discuss the content of today's webinar in more detail, myself and Jay would be happy to oblige, so please do get in touch. Okay, thank you for attending today, guys. I'm going to end the session.